A hull, an outboard motor, a warhead packed into the bow, total cost around $30,000. That is what an Iranian unmanned surface vessel, a suicide drone boat, runs to build and field in the Persian Gulf, $30,000. The price of a mid-range pickup truck. And yet, the United States Navy spends millions of dollars per warship, per deployment, trying to detect one before it closes the last mile. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. The boat is nearly invisible to the sensors built to find it, not because the technology is bad, because the geometry of the ocean itself works against the defender. A meter-high hull riding at sea level disappears into radar clutter long before a conventional contact would. The window between first detection and impact at 40+ knots closing speed can be under 90 seconds. 90 seconds from the moment a blip appears on a screen to the moment that $30,000 boat hits a $2 billion warship. That gap between what the attack costs and what it takes to stop it is the entire strategy, and as of June 2026, no fleet in the world has fully closed it. Stay with this, because what follows is not just about Iran and the United States. It is about the arithmetic of modern naval warfare, and why the side assembling the cheapest possible weapon often forces the most expensive possible response. We are going to walk through the detection geometry, the sensor suites, the reaction timelines, and the dilemma every captain in the 5th Fleet faces when the threat picture splits into 4 or 5 simultaneous tracks. Then we will ask you the same question those captains ask themselves, and we want your read before we show you what crews actually do. To understand why the drone boat works, start with the physics. A radar antenna mounted on a warship sits roughly 15 to 20 meters above waterline. The Earth curves. That curvature creates a radar horizon, the geometric limit beyond which a low-lying target simply cannot be seen by a surface search radar, no matter how powerful the transmitter. For a contact riding 1 meter above the water, that horizon sits at roughly 2 to 3 nautical miles in calm conditions. In a moderate sea state, Beaufort 4 or 5, which is typical in the Gulf of Oman, wave clutter pushes the practical detection range even closer. 2 nautical miles, sometimes less. A normal surface contact, a tanker, a frigate, a patrol boat with a superstructure, sits 8 to 10 meters above the waterline and shows up surface search radar at 12 nautical miles or more. That gives a crew plenty of time to classify, decide, and act. But a drone boat riding at 1 meter gives a crew almost nothing. 2 nautical miles at 40 knots, closing speed is 3 minutes. Subtract the time for a radar operator to notice the blip, call it out, have it classified, pass it to the officer of the deck, get a decision, and vector a countermeasure, and the realistic action window collapses to under 90 seconds, possibly much less. This is not a new problem. The USS Cole in October 2000 was approached by a small boat in Aden Harbor, and the crew had no procedural framework to engage it before it detonated. 17 sailors died. The boat cost almost nothing. The Cole required a $250 million repair. The arithmetic was already visible in 2000. What changed after 2016 is that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iraqi Navy, began fielding unmanned versions of that same concept, removing the human pilot and making the approach even harder to classify as hostile before it is too late. The RG fast boat threat has been documented since at least the tanker war of the 1980s, when Iranian speedboats harassed shipping in the Gulf under orders from the Supreme Leader's command structure. But the shift to unmanned surface vessels, USVs, accelerated under the pressure of sanctions and the strategic logic championed by RC commanders, including Esmail Khani, who succeeded Qasem Soleimani after the January 2020 strike. The USV is the maritime expression of the same cost exchange logic that drives the Shahed-136 loitering munition in the air domain. Build something cheap enough that the adversary exhausts expensive interceptors trying to stop it. The boats Iran fields in this role are not sophisticated by Western standards. The most commonly documented hull is roughly 5 to 7 meters long, fiberglass construction, powered by 1 or 2 outboard motors producing speeds between 35 and 50 knots, depending on load. The warhead is typically a shaped charge or bulk explosive in the 100 to 300 kilogram range, sufficient to hull a patrol vessel or start a catastrophic fire aboard a larger ship. Guidance in the basic version is GPS waypoint navigation with a terminal optical seeker, a camera feeding an image matching algorithm that homes on a heat signature or hull shape in the final phase. The entire electronics package costs a few $1,000s. The boat itself, built in Iranian facilities along the Persian Gulf Coast, adds another $20,000 to $25,000. What strikes me about this capability is not the technology, it is the doctrine. Iran is not trying to build a weapon that defeats American sensors in a direct technical contest. Iran is building a weapon that exploits the physics of the ocean surface in a way that makes American sensors structurally disadvantaged. Regardless of their sophistication, that is a fundamentally different problem to solve. Here is where the stakes get uncomfortable. The United States Navy's answer to the low radar cross-section USV threat is to throw its most advanced sensors at the problem, and those sensors were largely designed for a different threat geometry. The primary surface search radar on most US surface combatants in the 5th Fleet area of operations is the AANLISH SPS-73, a navigation and surface search set that operates in the I-band and is good at finding conventional contacts. Against a low-riding, fiberglass-hulled USV with minimal metallic content, its performance degrades sharply in sea states above Beaufort 3. The radar is not broken, it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The target is simply below its practical detection floor when wave clutter is present. The Navy has known this for years. The response has been to layer in electro-optical and infrared sensors, cameras and thermal images that do not rely on radar reflection at all. The ANCAX-2 electro-optical sensor and the FLIR Systems thermal cameras fitted to many surface combatants can detect the heat signature of an outboard motor and the whitewater wake of a fast-moving hull at distances of 3 to 5 nautical miles, somewhat further than the radar horizon for the same target. The problem is field of view. A camera sees a cone. A radar sweeps 360 degrees. Covering the full threat perimeter around a ship with electro-optical sensors requires multiple systems, multiple operators, and constant attention, which is exactly what a multi-USV saturation attack is designed to exhaust. The most capable sensor the Navy has deployed for this specific threat is the AN/SLQ-61 Light Marine Air Defense Integrated System, LMADIS, originally developed for the Marine and adapted for shipboard use. LMADIS combines a wide-area radar with electro-optical cameras and an electronic warfare component that can detect and jam the radio frequency. Control links of drone systems. It detected and downed an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz in July 2019 when USS Boxer employed it. But LMADIS was designed primarily for air domain small US threats. Against the GPS-guided autonomous SUS that is not receiving radio commands after launch, the electronic warfare component offers limited help. The camera still has to find the boat in wave clutter, and the fire control solution still has to be generated and executed inside that 90-second window. The Mk38 Mod 2 and Mod 3 machine gun systems, 25mm Bushmaster chain guns, are the primary hard kill solution for USV threats on US destroyers and frigates. They can engage targets at ranges up to 2 nautical miles with precision, which covers the detection window almost exactly. The problem is slew rate and human decision time. If a contact appears at 2 nautical miles and is closing at 45 knots, the gun crew has roughly 160 seconds before impact in open water. But in a cluttered channel environment with commercial traffic, nearby the rules of engagement require positive identification before engagement, which consumes 40 to 60 seconds by itself. I spent time going through the after-action documentation from several 5th Fleet incidents, and one detail kept appearing in nearly every report. The hardest part was not the intercept. The hardest part was the classification, deciding, under time pressure, with imperfect sensor data, whether a fast-moving contact in the radar shadow zone was an Iranian USV, an aggressive fishing dhow, or a poorly lit commercial speedboat. Getting that decision wrong in either direction has consequences. One ends with a warship on fire, the other ends with an international incident involving civilian casualties. The sensor picture comes together. The gun is ready. The contact is inside 2 nautical miles, and then the Operations Center screen shows not 1 blip, but 4. The volume problem is the second dimension of the USV threat, and it may be more dangerous than the detection geometry. A single operator, 1 person, 1 workstations, can supervise several autonomous USVs simultaneously after launch. The boats navigate independently on pre-programmed GPS routes, activate terminal seekers in the final phase, and do not require continuous control uplinks. A cell of 5 USVs launched from a mothership or a coastal facility can approach a target from multiple vectors simultaneously, forcing a defending crew to split attention, split fire control solutions, and split the reaction timeline across multiple tracks at once. This is the tactic documented in attacks on Saudi and UAE-flagged vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden by Houthi forces, which operate under a doctrine and with equipment that shares significant lineage with URG capabilities. In the March 2022 attack on the Rabi fuel terminal, multiple fast inshore attack craft approached simultaneously from different bearings, forcing Saudi coastal defense batteries to prioritize. In the naval domain, the same logic applies. A defending ship's Mk38 gun can engage 1 contact at a time. Its fire control radar can track several, but engagement sequencing takes time. If USVs 1 and 2 are inside 1.5 miles, while 3 and 4 are still at 2 miles, which does the gun crew engage first? The closest threat, which may be a decoy drawing fire, while the real attack vector closes from a different bearing. What surprises me about this tactic is not that it works in theory, it is that the math holds even against ships with significant defensive depth. A US Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries the Mk-38, the Phalanx use as a last-ditch hard-kill system for close-in threats, and crew-served weapons including .50 caliber M2 machine guns and 7.62mm M240 guns for very short range. That sounds like plenty of firepower, but the Phalanx was designed for anti-missile defense, and its engagement envelope against sea surface targets is limited by the same wave clutter problem that afflicts the surface search radar, the .50 caliber and 7.62 crew-served weapons require sailors to stand on an open deck in a threat environment, which creates its own risk management problem. And the Mk-38 is one gun with one barrel. Here is the take that will probably draw some pushback. The US Navy has known about the USV threat in granular detail since at least 2016, when Urgi forces harassed USS Nitze in the Strait of Hormuz with fast boats, and the investment in purpose-built USV detection and defeat systems has been consistently underfunded relative to the scale of the threat. The Phalanx gets upgraded, the SM-6 interceptor gets upgraded, the anti-submarine warfare systems get upgraded. But the problem of a $30,000 fiberglass boat closing at 45 knots in sea clutter has not received a hardware solution commensurate with the threat frequency. That is an institutional choice, and it has consequences for every crew deployed to the 5th Fleet area. The money does flow, just not evenly. Defense budget documents for fiscal year 2025 and 2026 show the Navy requesting funding for the Robotic Combat Surface Vessel Program, the Medium Unmanned Surface Vehicle, and upgrades to the Mk-38 targeting system. Pete Hegseth's Pentagon has emphasized unmanned systems across all as a priority under the current administration's Force Structure Review. Donald Trump's broader posture toward Iran, maximum pressure economics combined with forward military presence, creates operational tempo in the Gulf that keeps these detection problems live, not theoretical. But the procurement cycle is long. A sensor upgrade funded in the 2026 budget does not reach the fleet until 2028 at the earliest. In the meantime, the ships on station in the Gulf use the systems they have, and the systems they have were not optimized for this threat. So the Navy leans on the sensors it has, works around their limits with helicopters and small boats, and that is where the second half of the dilemma opens up. The tactical answer most naval commanders reach for when surface search radar cannot reliably find low-riding USVs is to pull sensors forward. That means using embarked helicopters, the MH-60R Seahawk, or the smaller MQ-8 Fire Scout unmanned helicopter to provide elevated surveillance of the threat perimeter. An MH-60R flying at 500 feet can see a USV wake at 6 to 8 nautical miles in moderate sea states because elevation changes the geometry. The radar horizon extends. The electro-optical systems get a better look angle. The wave clutter that masks a low target from a ship-mounted sensor is much less problematic from altitude. This works, and it creates a new set of problems immediately. An MH-60R costs roughly $37 million per airframe. It carries a crew of 3 or 4. It burns jet fuel at a rate that limits useful station time to roughly 4 hours per sortie without refueling. To maintain continuous aerial surveillance of a threat sector, you need multiple aircraft on rotation, which means multiple crews, sustained maintenance tempo, and sustained fuel consumption. A US destroyer typically carries one MH-60R. A carrier strike group has more assets, but the destroyers and frigates doing patrol work in the Gulf often operate semi-independently, without immediate helicopter support. The gap between what is needed and what is available is bridged by careful prioritization, which is another way of saying that surveillance is not continuous. The MQ-8 Fire Scout offers an unmanned alternative with longer endurance, 6 to 8 hours per sortie, and no aircrew risk. It can carry the same electro-optical and radar payloads as a manned helicopter, but its sensor data quality in adverse conditions is somewhat lower than an MH-60R with an experienced crew, and its integration into the ship's combat management system still requires dedicated operator attention. The ship that launches a Fire Scout to watch the port threat sector has to have someone watching the Fire Scout feed, while also watching the starboard radar picture. In a multi-axis USV attack, that attention management problem returns. The other forward sensor option is the small boat, a rigid inflatable boat, an 11-meter rigid hull inflatable, or a Mark 6 patrol boat, dispatched to watch approaches from a distance. A crew in a Mark 6 patrol boat at 3 miles can see a USV wake at a range where the mothership's radar is still blind. They can call the contact and give the ship another 60 to 90 seconds of warning. The problem is straightforward. Those sailors are now between the ship and the incoming threat, in a small boat in the same waters the USV is crossing. The Mark VI carries a 25mm P-38 and crew-served weapons. It can engage a USV. But if it is overwhelmed by a multi-boat saturation attack, the crew is in extreme danger. You have traded warning time for crew exposure. The captain who pushes small boats forward gains detection range. The captain who keeps small boats close loses detection range but protects those crews. Both choices are defensible. Neither fully solves the problem. Put yourself in the captain's chair for a moment. It is 0300 local time in the Gulf of Oman. Your surface search radar is showing nothing beyond a mile and a half on the port quarter because Sea State 3 is degrading the picture. Your helicopter is on deck because a maintenance issue grounded it 6 hours ago. Your Mark VI is 50 meters off the port beam. The threat intelligence says UGI coastal units have been active for the past 72 hours. What do you do with the Mark VI? And then, before the captain finishes the thought, the port quarter radar shows a single fast-moving blip at 1.8 miles, and then 2 more, and then a fourth. This is what a real-time USV defense scenario looks like inside a ship's combat management system. The AN SHWISE-2 integrated automatic detection and tracking system, or its successor the SD's, ship self-defense system, begins building tracks automatically when targets appear above the clutter threshold. On a Ticonderoga-class cruiser or an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the combat system can track multiple surface contacts simultaneously and queue them for engagement. But queue management under time pressure with overlapping tracks is not automatic. A human operator decides which track gets the gun. A human operator decides when to fire. The cognitive load on that operator at the moment 4 tracks appear simultaneously, inside 2 nautical miles, closing at 40 plus knots, is extreme. Training mitigates it. The Navy's Surface Warfare Officer training pipeline includes low, slow, small target scenarios. Battlegroup exercises in the Composite Training Unit Exercise Program run multi-USV attack scenarios, but training cannot fully replicate the physiological stress of a real engagement with real consequences. And in the historical record, USS Cole, the Falklands, the Persian Gulf tanker war, the pattern of human decision-making under that specific kind of compressed time pressure is not uniformly favorable. Mistakes happen not because people are incompetent, but because the timeline is shorter than human reaction physiology comfortably handles. What do you think? Is 90 seconds enough time for any crew to reliably make the right decision? Or is the timeline inherently shorter than the problem requires? Drop your read in the comments, because this is exactly the question the Navy's acquisition community is arguing about right now, and the answers are not settled. The longer-term technological answer that both the Navy and defense contractors are pursuing is automation. If a human cannot reliably classify and engage a USV threat inside 90 seconds, perhaps an automated fire control system can. The Navy's Odin, Optical Dazzling Interdictor, Navy, is a directed energy laser system that can disable USV optical seekers and electro-optical guidance systems non-destructively, buying time. The high-energy laser with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance system, Helios, mounted on USS Preble starting in 2021, offers a more capable directed energy hard kill option against small boats and UAVs. A laser engagement takes seconds, costs roughly $1 of electricity per shot, and does not require the crew to make a shoot, no-shoot decision on a 30-round burst. It can dazzle and disable without necessarily destroying, which helps with rules of engagement complexity. But Helios has a range limitation in maritime conditions. Humidity, salt haze, and atmospheric scintillation degrade laser effectiveness at ranges beyond about 1 nautical mile under typical Gulf conditions, which means the laser engages inside 1 mile. The contact is already inside the minimum reaction distance for a conventional gun engagement, and the margin for failure is almost zero. Directed energy buys efficiency, not range. The detection problem is still unsolved. The really expensive answer, the one that costs far more than the USV, and more than the laser, and more than the helicopter, and more than all of them combined, is a comprehensive sensor network that removes the ship as the primary detection node entirely. Persistent maritime ISR, the combination of overhead satellites, persistent unmanned aerial vehicles like the MQ-9 Reaper in maritime patrol configuration, and a network of distributed surface and subsurface sensors that can detect USV launches at source, track them continuously, and queue shipboard defenses with minutes of warning rather than seconds. That architecture exists in concept. Elements of it are operational. The MQ-9 Reaper has flown maritime patrol missions in the Gulf under CENTCOM authority, providing ISR support to 5th Fleet units. But persistent ISR coverage requires assets that are always somewhere else at the same time. The MQ-9 fleet is not infinite. CENTCOM priorities compete with Indo-Pacific priorities, European theatre priorities, and the baseline requirement to support ground force operations. The captain of a destroyer doing Gulf patrol in June 2026 under Donald Trump's maximum pressure posture toward Iran cannot assume that an MQ-9 is overhead at the moment the threat launches. She has to plan for the sensor picture her ship carries, augmented by whatever theatre assets happen to be available, knowing that the threat can appear inside her detection horizon with less warning than her standard operating procedures were designed around. The economic dimension of this problem is worth dwelling on, because it is where the strategic logic of the asymmetric threat becomes clearest. The cost to field a single Iranian USV attack cell, 5 boats, a mothership or coastal launcher, command infrastructure, and crew training runs somewhere between $150,000 and $500,000 for a single operation, depending on complexity. Against that, the United States Navy's sensor and defensive response costs per deployment include the electro-optical and infrared sensor suites on a destroyer, valued at roughly $12 to $18 million installed. The ANSPS-73 and associated surface search radar suite at another $3 to $5 million. Lamardis at approximately $8 million per system. A single MH-60R at $37 million. The Helios laser system at over $150 million per installation. The ship itself, an Arleigh Burke Flight IA destroyer, costs approximately $2 billion. That cost ratio, attack cell at a few $100,000, defending sensor and weapon suite at hundreds of millions, is the strategic argument. Iran does not need to sink a destroyer. Iran needs to force the United States to spend those hundreds of millions per ship, multiplied across a fleet of dozens of surface combatants in the region indefinitely. The arithmetic of deterrence in the Gulf is not about who wins a single engagement. It is about who can sustain the cost exchange over time. And URGI planners, under the guidance of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, with explicit doctrinal support from commanders like Esmail Khani, have understood this ratio for at least 2 decades. Masoud Pezeshkian's government, which came to power in 2024 presenting a reformist face to the international community, has not fundamentally altered the URGI's maritime doctrine. The ARGC operates with significant autonomy from the civilian government on military posture questions. Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel, meanwhile, has maintained pressure on Iranian naval and missiles infrastructure through strikes and covert operations, which keeps the IRGC's asset replacement cycle under stress, but has not degraded the USV capability significantly because the boats are cheap, enough to rebuild quickly. Here is something the cost charts do not capture: the human dimension of sustained threat vigilance. A crew on a 6-month deployment in the 5th Fleet area of operations, rotating through watches in a high-threat environment, operating under rules of engagement that require positive identification before engagement, maintaining sensor watches around the clock, running drills and battle stations, exercises on top of normal operational tempo. That crew is being asked to sustain a level of alertness that is physiologically expensive. Fatigue is a documented factor in naval incidents. The USS Fitzgerald and USS John S. McCain collisions in 2017, both in the Pacific, involved crew fatigue as a contributing factor according to Navy investigation reports. Neither involved a hostile action. The cognitive load of a high-threat environment in the Gulf compounds that baseline problem. One detail that stuck with me in the operational literature: in the years following the Cole bombing, the Navy developed a force protection doctrine called Composite Warfare Commander Instructions for Theater Security Cooperation. Essentially, formalized protocols for threat assessment in port and transit. Those protocols are good, but they were written around the assumption of enough warning time to implement them. The USV at 45 knots inside 2 nautical miles arrives before most of those protocols can complete a single cycle. The doctrine is sound. The timeline it assumes does not match the threat. The sensor suites keep getting better. The lasers keep getting cheaper per shot. The unmanned systems keep getting more capable. Something is changing in the balance, but how much and how fast? The honest assessment, as of mid-2026, is that the technological trajectory favors neither side cleanly. Iran's USV capability is mature and cheap to sustain. The guidance packages improve incrementally as commercial, off-the-shelf optical seeker technology improves. The same advances that make consumer drones better make terminal guidance for a $30,000 boat better. The warhead technology is stable. The operational concept is proven. The cost floor for a meaningful USV attack will not rise significantly because the core bill of materials, hull, motor, explosive, cheap guidance, is not subject to the economic pressures that drive up the cost of sophisticated weaponry. On the American side, Helios and its successors will eventually field systems that engage reliably at 3 miles, not 1. When that happens, the USV threat profile changes materially. A laser that can dazzle or disable a guidance seeker at 3 miles gives crews roughly 4 minutes of engagement time rather than 90 seconds, which transforms the decision calculus. The Navy's Robotic Combat Surface Vehicle program will field autonomous defensive pickets that extend the detection perimeter without putting sailors in direct threat exposure. Autonomous surface vehicles, the Sea Hunter class and its follow-ons, can serve as forward sensor nodes, placing detection capability at 4 to 6 miles from the mothership with no crew at risk. But these systems are not in the hands of 5th Fleet destroyers today, in numbers sufficient to cover every patrol tasking. The transition from the current sensor architecture to a distributed autonomous detection network takes years and billions of dollars. In the meantime, the gap exists, and in that gap, the $30,000 boat holds a structurally asymmetric advantage against a $2 billion ship in the same waters where a fifth of the world's oil supply moves every day through a channel 30 miles wide. The Strait does not care about the cost ratio. The physics of the radar horizon are not going to be negotiated away. The ocean surface is flat, and a flat horizon has a fixed geometry that no sensor budget fully overcomes at the low end of the target size spectrum. That is the stalemate. Not a political one, not a diplomatic one, a geometric one. The defender watching 360 degrees of ocean with sensors designed for a different threat era against an attacker who picks the time and bearing of a single 30-second closing run is operating at a structural disadvantage that money makes smaller but does not eliminate. So here is the captain's choice, stated plainly. Option 1. Keep the expensive sensors looking far out, except that they will not reliably find a low-riding USV until it is inside 2 nautical miles and rely on the gun crew's 90-second response window. You preserve your small boat crews and your helicopter air crews, but you accept a detection latency that may not be recoverable against a well-timed saturation attack. Option 2. Push forward assets. Small boats, helicopters, autonomous vehicles, to extend the detection perimeter to 4 or 5 miles, gaining 3 to 4 additional minutes of response time. You accept the exposure of those forward assets to the same threat environment you are trying to detect. Both options trade something. Neither fully closes the math. The flat horizon never lies. Drop your read in the comments, option 1 or option 2, and why. We read every response, and the split in this community tends to track how people weight platform risk versus cruise risk. It is not an obvious answer, which is exactly why the Navy has not found a single consensus solution across its surface warfare community. If you want to understand what happens when that detection gap gets closed in real time, what the engagement actually looks like from inside a combat system under live fire, that is the next one in this series. It goes deeper on the Mk-38 fire control problem and the rules of engagement overlay that makes every engagement decision harder than it looks on paper. The link is above. Stay with us.